Okay. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share this morning or ask any questions or comment on?
I can share something real quick.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah, just in standing meditation, feeling the 9 pearls and the song, I had a really interesting experience where I felt my pelvis shifting apart, like the sides of my pelvis, the wings shifting apart, like a large, what felt like a really large amount, which I'd never experienced. Like I felt it kind of opening, but it was like they were drifting apart. It felt like a really considerable amount. And I felt like suddenly, I don't think it was, but it felt like 6 inches or something, like a really large amount. And I felt like I had to adjust my stance to be wider. And it was a really interesting and kind of also really vulnerable experience to have that happen. And then as that opened, I felt like I could breathe a lot better. And like my chest could do the same thing. I felt like my chest had been limited by my pelvis, which I hadn't had awareness of. So I just wanted to share that. That was a really unexpected and interesting experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, what's the word for it? You know, when these movements happen, that's actually a movement that a lot of people actually don't get to experience. And it's actually so what you felt literally is, you know, your pelvis moving apart from your sacrum. So your pelvic wings, and most people don't have actually awareness of those moving. And the other part of it is that actually, this sounds kind of interesting, but most people don't have awareness of the shoulder blades moving. So most people don't realize when their shoulder blades, it's not that the shoulder blades aren't moving, but the shoulder blades, people don't realize when the shoulder blade is moving. And just the same way your pelvis is supposed to move a certain way. And at some point over time, people's movement gets constricted because people fall into certain specific movement patterns. You know, because we're designed to be efficient. And so unless our lifestyle requires us to go through the range of all our joints, our movement becomes specialized to the kind of lifestyle that we have, because, you know, that's efficiency, it's better for survival on the whole, and things like that. And so we start becoming, actually our movement becomes, starts becoming rather specialized in that manner. And, you know, we have no awareness of that, right? I mean, that just happens. And so unless our lifestyle itself requires us to keep moving our joints in all its directions, it won't. But then it's kind of interesting. If we actually make that part of our lifestyle, then that is also what becomes specialized. So, you know, like in the same way, now our body gets really good at being able to do that, because it's like, oh, geez, you know, I have to move in all these directions all the time. And so, you know, it's kind of like, it's good to look at the body from this perspective, because it changes the way you look at it and how you approach training it, if you will. But having said that, your shoulder blade and your pelvis, so if your spine is at the center and your shoulder blades, you know, they shift away and towards the spine and along your spine, your pelvis actually does the same thing, because your pelvis is kind of your shoulder equivalent for the body. And so to have that understanding is really important, because most of us don't think to shift our pelvis in relation to our sacrum in the same way. And the sacrum is a spine equivalent in the pelvic area. And so it moves to and from and around in relation to the sacrum. And so that's actually what you notice. And that's actually, what happens the longer you do the goal series, because the goal series basically uses different approaches to basically move all your joints over time. And it uses just actually movement. It just uses tapping, it uses rubbing, and it uses actually yoga, and it uses all of them. So at some point, you start moving it, and it's actually based upon meditation. And so while having meditative awareness, you're getting to experience your body in all these different aspects. And so the likelihood of something that a person was holding, actually letting go, and then becoming aware of how they're holding it, and then learning how to move it, goes up significantly. And so that's kind of like what you realize. And most people don't realize that the breathing actually has to hit 3 diaphragms. So there's a diaphragm right in your throat. There's a diaphragm, your actual diaphragm that you breathe with, that's underneath your lungs. And then you've got a pelvic diaphragm, or your pelvic floor. And when you breathe, actually all 3 of them needs to actually move properly for a person to breathe well. And for the pelvic diaphragm, or the diaphragm to reach the pelvic area, your pelvis actually needs to be mobile. And when it's not mobile, your breathing actually is limited. It's impeded. And so that's actually one of the reasons why you started feeling your breath in the manner you did, because it started moving. So anyways, so that's actually really good. That's actually a considerable kind of letting go. And it does seem very exaggerated. It doesn't move that way, but it does feel. And it's because in relation to how much was moving before, all of a sudden, when you feel the full range of the motion of your pelvis, it feels significant. So, but anyways, I'm gonna say the same thing that I always say: don't try and repeat it.
Yes.
Just and let me actually rephrase that. Try and repeat it, but don't try and get the same extent. Like if you don't feel like, so let's say, for instance, like instead of 6 inches, you feel like only 2 inches, like metaphorically speaking, it's okay. Now you have movement. Focus on the fact that you got movement. Don't focus on the fact that you lost range. It's that comparison that really tortures us, and creates more tension. Now that you have had this experience, you're gonna notice you have much more mobility in that area, or at least awareness of it. And sticking with that awareness is more important than how much you can move. People get caught up in, it's kind of like people get caught up in, oh, I was able to move it this much. Since I'm training, shouldn't I be able to move more now? And actually, it doesn't work like that. Simply because now that your body's found that, it's gonna start looking for new connections, and as it finds new connections, other muscles engage around it. And for you to be able to get that same range of motion, basically you needed to be relaxed in that direction with nothing else engaging. The movements actually tend to, if you study movement, the more you study movement gets more complex and more coordinated, but less. And so you're not going to get the same range of movement unless you start being able to have control of all your muscles around the area. That's why it's such a hit and miss in the beginning, but then it actually starts releasing and having where you start gaining full control over time. And
So
so
that's why at the beginning you have a big opening and then it drops a lot And then over time, you can actually hit it again and go beyond it. But it takes some time because you have to actually coordinate and integrate everything.
Yes, yes, that's correct. That's correct. So, and if you don't have understanding of that, then you think that you're actually losing gains, actually, when in reality you're actually not. And there are some superficial ways to keep that gains, but it's not worth it, because then the rest of the body doesn't develop at the cost of keeping those gains.
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So what's more important is a feeling of looseness. And what you'll notice is that even if you lose a certain level of the range of motion that you had gained, you'll notice that your looseness actually, it tends to stay. Now, you do have to try and get as much of the range of motion as possible without forcing it. And if you do that, actually, sometimes we get lucky and we get to keep a lot more of the range than we anticipated. So it's kind of like letting go and not having attachment. Sometimes actually it tends to increase the chances of us being able to keep our gains. But because of what I just mentioned in terms of the integration, that's like a lot of times not necessarily the case, which is actually one of the reasons why a whole body perspective is so important, because it allows us to be in reality that our body is actually indeed improving, and that we're not actually going back, and that the best way to is have whole body awareness and not force anything and let your body naturally open. Now, of course, not forcing anything doesn't mean that you aren't working hard. You're still working really hard. It's just you're not trying to force something to happen out of fear. And there's a big difference, because when you're just working hard at something, then you're being mindful and you're doing your best, but you're not pushing something because something isn't happening. You're actually just moving with awareness. You're like, oh, it doesn't move as much today. Does it want to move any further? Oh no, it doesn't. Okay, that's very interesting. I guess that is my best today. So there's a certain, so the conversation, the internal conversation sounds more like this. It doesn't sound like it's like, I was able to go as far as this much yesterday. I gotta do this again, raw. And it's like, and then you force it, and then sometimes you get there, and then you think you got some results, and then the next day you're even tighter. And then you try even harder the next day because it's tighter. It takes even longer to open up to the same extent, and so on and so forth. And your body is actually sustaining more and more tension from all the forcing. And so the internal conversation is very different. So it's one of the reasons why the teachings center around letting go, having wholeness, focusing on oneness, because then the internal conversation changes and your development is much more wholesome.
Thank you, Master Kim. This is really, really helpful. I really appreciate like the context about, well, I feel like for me, it really shows just how well designed we are. Like even like things that we would think, or it's like, why is my pelvis restricted? Like you could think that there's something wrong with that, or it shouldn't be like that. But, actually seeing, oh, that's actually my system being efficient with movement, and that we can like automate actually range of motion the same way. And that when it feels like we're losing ground or like losing what we've gained, that's actually also our system, like super well designed because it's integrating. So it's a really helpful perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a it's an interesting thing because, you know, like I don't think we as Taoists we cultivate, you know, because that's a natural thing to do. You know, basically Taoists realize that naturally we try and build and specialize. And so the question becomes not whether we should or not, the question becomes, what is it that we want to specialize in? And Taoists basically decided to specialize in wholeness. So if you're going to specialize, and the question becomes whether the question isn't whether you're going to specialize or not specialize, because you're going to specialize. You know, it's like grumpy old men specialized in being grumpy. They got really good at it. So you'll notice that it's near impossible to bring them out of it because they have mastery over it.
Totally.
So, and so, you know, it's kind of like we're designed to seek mastery. And so the question, so like if your pelvis isn't moving, then the question shouldn't be, you know, why isn't my pelvis moving? The question should be more, why don't I want to move my pelvis? Or, you know, what is it trying to accomplish that I didn't realize it's trying to accomplish? Because you're unconscious, or your, if you will, your lizard brain or reptilian brain, or in your limbic system, your mammalian brain, between them, they're trying to accomplish something for you. And it's just, you know, what we would call nowadays the prefrontal cortex is just not aware of it. Because these things are automated systems that are happening, you know, in automation. You know, it's like, that's why you're not aware. And unless you bring conscious awareness to it, it stays automated. And it's working exactly the way it was designed to. And it's kind of like blaming a computer for following a program without realizing that what it was programmed to do.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I guess, yeah, specializing in wholeness, that sounds like a pretty good deal.
Yeah, I think so too. Okay, very good.
Thank you so
for
much,
sharing.
Master Kim.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay. So I'm almost done cleaning here. So I gotta close here soon, but does anyone have anything they'd like to share in closing or comment on, or? Okay, very good. Have a good practice. Have a good cultivation day. Have a great day at Tao.
Thank you so much, Mr.
Kim.
Kim, for the practice and the teachings.
Thank you, Mr.
Welcome.